Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinsler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I always look forward to these weekly chats.
Well, it's great, and this is a really great time of year, isn't it? Here we are in early September.
I love September.
Oh, it is great, and it's like we've gone through, just in the early part of September, we went through ridiculously hot days, and now it's nice and cool, and it'll get warm again, then it'll cool down again, but it's really just it's just kind of a lively time.
You know, it's interesting how one growing season goes into the next, because one reason I enjoy September is because I already look at next year's growing season. I kind of look at, well, this did good, I want to plant more of it. This didn't look so good, I'm not going to plant this again. So it's interesting. I like to roll one growing season already up into the next. So I'm thinking next year already.
Yeah. Well, and then, in the immediate future, we've got harvest, a lot of harvest kind of things coming up. And yesterday, as we're taping this, yesterday, there was a big event with the NDSU horticulture program, right?
Yeah, the Horticulture Research Farm, which is about 40 miles west of Fargo, between Absaraka and Amenia. Okay, well, why is there a horticulture research farm out there? Well, the Red River Valley heavy clay soil isn't typical of the wider region. And so that being out of the Red River Valley is maybe a little more typical of soils across the region. So great event. That Horticulture Research Farm is a wonderful gem. And from time to time, we have events out there. So always stay tuned for those field days.
And what was this week's?
This week's was the fruit and vegetable research. So we rode around on wagons, and the researchers told us everything from the best garlic varieties to plant to what's happening with broccoli, cauliflower, the best varieties there, and tomato research, lots of good things. Apples, rejuvenating apple trees. So lots of good information that comes out of that research farm. And, of course, on this Saturday, by the time this airs, the event will be done, but it's always interesting. A large part of that horticulture research farm is devoted to an arboretum, 35 acres, the largest collection of woody plants, trees, and shrubs in really the upper Midwest, or at least west of Minneapolis.
I couldn't get out there yesterday, and I really wanted to, but so I'm one of those people who's going to keep an eye on for upcoming events out there, because just walking around the grounds sounds like it just would be wonderful to see.
No, the wheels are turning. Next summer, let's do a podcast from out there.
Oh, that would be great.
That'd be awesome.
That would be
You'll
really
enjoy
fun.
it.
Speaking of fruits, hey, what do you call a magical berry?
I don't know.
Cherry, Potter.
I think your humor's getting better and better. I don't know that we're ready for the Don and John comedy hour. But
I think we'll talk. We'll keep with.
But I like that one, Cherry Potter.
Plants. Well, it's not prime fruit season, but with harvest time, got us thinking about how we could create, as you call it, an edible landscape.
I love it when an old concept is reborn again. Okay, an edible landscapes. That is a wonderful old concept that has gotten new strength, new energization over the last decade or so. Okay, when I say it's an old concept, an edible landscape. Now, when the pioneers settled this area, the homesteaders, one of the first things they did after they built their home and their barn was to plant things like rhubarb, horseradish, they needed asparagus, choke cherries so they could make jelly and juice and wine, and Juneberry. And so around their farmsteads, they had these shrubs and trees, maybe an apple tree, fruit tree. So anyway, their farmyard was kind of decorated with things that not only they could eat or eat the produce from, and but also they kind of looked good. It gave some screening, and so these things were double duty. So anyway, now fast forward 100 years or so, and we're refinding that concept of an edible landscape. So as long as we're going to have landscape, trees and shrubs in our yard, why not have some of them produce things we can eat? So that's the whole concept that has really gained traction, in addition to just having nice looking shrubs and things. Let's eat some stuff off of them. So I thought it'd be fun to talk about that. Before we get into that, as I was thinking about this edible landscapes, do you remember the Grape Nuts cereal commercial that had Yule Gibbons? Maybe 20 years or more ago. Well, anyway, Yule Gibbons, I'm sure he's probably long passed away, but he was a naturalist, and on this Grape Nuts commercial, they had him eating a spoonful of cereal, and he always said, reminds me of pine nuts. And I was thinking about that. We don't need to eat pine cone nuts, and I don't need to nibble these spruce cones off of our spruce tree. There are many more maybe palatable things that we can be eating off of our landscapes. So anyway, when we talk about edible landscapes, we aren't just talking about eating spruce cones, but actual things that are really good and tasty. So I thought it'd be fun then to go through a list of some of these things that we could include in our landscapes. And now, even if our landscapes are already established, many of us have a landscape that we already have things in, but we can usually find space to include some of these things in. Or if you're a blank slate, you can start from scratch and include these things in.
Yeah, well, let's just kind of dive in. Let's start with some of the larger shrubs. And this one, one that people are probably familiar with in this area, if not by utilizing, but certainly by name, chokecherry.
Yes, chokecherry. And when we incorporate these things into our landscape, most landscapes need some trees, larger shrubs, smaller shrubs, and of course the chokecherry would fit into the large shrub, maybe even a shrubby tree, a small type tree. Kind of depends how you'd prune it. But chokecherry, that wonderful, it's a native for one thing, so you sometimes will find these in the little river draws. And they were planted in shelter belts too, so sometimes you'll find them there. But they make a very nice yard-type, small-scale tree or a very large shrub. Again, it depends kind of how you prune it. So the chokecherry, wonderful for juice, wine, jams. Chokecherry jelly is awesome. And you do usually have to try to beat the birds to them because they'll strip them down. Now, one interesting concept is the chokecherry itself is a green-leaved shrub, small tree, but also a close relative, which is actually the same thing, is the called the Canada red cherry. Okay. Now, are you familiar with that? Canada red cherry. Yeah. It's probably the most common small-scale tree that has purple leaves in our area. Interesting concept, interesting history to that. Chokecherry, green leaves. They've been around since pioneer days. Okay, and it's produced. In Bismarck, probably I think goes back to maybe the 1920s or 30s, in the soil conservation plantings where they produce all these seedlings of chokecherries, green leaves, okay. Well, in all these seedlings, up popped one that had purple leaves. And a gentleman by the name of Lawrence Schubert, who had a good eye for horticulture, saw, wow, a purple leaf chokecherry. So he took that seedling out, propagated it from that, and it was called the Schubert chokecherry. Well, Schubert chokecherry isn't a very magical name for marketing. The Canadians recognized the value. They started propagating it, and it was called then the Canada red cherry. And it is chokecherry. Okay. So for anyone that has Canada red cherry, it is chokecherry, the Schubert chokecherry. And so if you're wondering if those are edible, they are. They're the same thing as the green leaf chokecherry. Now, I should mention a caution. Anytime you aren't sure if a berry is edible, make sure we identify it, because there are some berries that are not. For example, common buckthorn has a purple berry that looks much like chokecherry, but it gives a very severe stomach upset. So we need to make sure that, for example, I'm going to sidetrack a little bit. A couple of years ago, I received an email from someone and said, I made about 20 pints of jelly, from what I thought was chokecherry. Someone indicated to her that maybe it wasn't chokecherry. And so I asked, could you send me a leaf sample? And it was common buckthorn. Common buckthorn's botanical name is Rhamnus cathartica. Cathartica means it gives you a really bad stomach upset. And so that jelly, if given to others, would have caused quite severe stomach upset. And so it was too bad she had to dispose of it. But the point being, we always need to identify any of the unknown berries that we might be looking at. But chokecherry, a wonderful large shrub, small-scale tree to include in a landscape.
Yeah, and certainly when we're talking about, for the purpose of this show, we're talking about things that you can bring into your yard. So these are things that hopefully you'll be getting from a garden center that knows and is properly labeled, things that are good for our area, good for our yard. Another one is a pin cherry.
Now, that one isn't widely known. Now, on my bucket list is to have grown everything possible that we could grow in North Dakota.
How are you doing with that?
Well, I'm glad you asked. After 50-some years of gardening seasons, I'm happy to say I have not reached nearly everything that can be planted. And I love that, because when I say I love gardening in North Dakota, there are so many things we can grow. So I have a long list yet before I've grown everything we can. And pin cherry. I've not grown pin cherry. And so I'm going to try that. It's maybe one of the lesser known of the edible fruits, but can be used. Juices, syrup, jelly, pin cherry.
Here's another one that people probably heard of, but Juneberry.
Yes, Juneberry. I love some of the names of Juneberry, nicknames for Juneberry. One is the blueberry of the north, because once you get out of Minnesota's acid soils, blueberries do not do well. West of that natural native blueberry, up northern Minnesota, you can go pick blueberries. They love that acid soil. Not west of there. It's very difficult, almost impossible to grow blueberries in North Dakota, western Minnesota. So anyway, the blueberry of the north is Juneberry. The Canadians would not know what we're talking about. They call it the Saskatoon or serviceberry.
Okay.
That's also why I love botanical names. Amelanchier alnifolia. You could talk to somebody in Germany and refer to that, and oh yeah, I know what that is. In Canada, even though they might not know what Juneberry is, if you refer to it by the botanical name, they'll know, oh yeah, we call that the Saskatoon. So that's fun. Juneberry, an awesome flavored, large shrub, kind of small scale tree. Some of these things, depending on how you prune them, is it a shrub, is it a tree? And so some of these large type shrubs kind of intermingle that interface between the two. So Juneberry, very, very wonderful flavor. The birds love it too. So it will require bird netting.
Well, let's take a quick little break. When we come back, we're going to talk about more shrubs, more berries, and more things you can put in your yard to have a nice edible landscape.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
All right, we're back. We're talking edible landscapes, and let's talk about the elderberry. This is another one people may have heard of.
Yes, and there are also some kind of decorative type elderberries that you'll find at the garden centers. Elderberry has a very interesting leaf and kind of an interesting habit. So in addition to being edible, many of these shrubs and trees that we're going to talk about have unique plant forms. And so, of course, it's difficult to describe on a podcast, to visualize what this elderberry leaf looks like, but they're decorative. They're very nice. And so elderberry wine, of course, is kind of a classic, but also the juice can be used for other things as well. And you'll find some named cultivars in the garden center trade that have a little larger fruit than some. So elderberry, definitely one that we can use in our landscapes.
Yeah, you said the names to kind of look for are maybe York and Adams.
Right. There are some of those
varieties
selected with a little bigger fruit size than others.
Well, here's one that people will probably know, and this the highbush cranberry. This may be a little bit different from what people associate cranberries as being, but let's talk about that.
Yeah, because it's not the bog-type cranberry that we would eat at Thanksgiving.
And it's mostly those are from Wisconsin, right?
Exactly. Wisconsin, Massachusetts, and of course, so they get kind of the nickname, I suppose, because they're a little bit maybe kind of look like, at least the same color, maybe a little the same flavor. So highbush cranberry, it's native to North Dakota and Minnesota. The Native Americans used this to mix with buffalo meat, and they dried it into a food called pemmican.
Oh, I've had that.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah, exactly. So highbush cranberry is one of those that they included in that.
I didn't realize
in that food. Yeah, so it's kind of awesome. Now, highbush cranberry, if the fruits are allowed to become really ripe, fully ripe, then I've eaten them fresh off the. I'm not going to say they're really sweet. Right. And juicy. They're a little bit tart. So I can see why the Native Americans used them in addition to other things. But they make a wonderful jelly. You probably would not eat a bowl full of these just as is. But, when used in recipes, highbush cranberry muffins are delicious.
Oh, yeah.
And so anyway, Viburnum trilobum. It's a member of the viburnum group. Also, when I say some of these things are double duty, that they make really nice looking landscape shrubs, the viburnums in the fall of the year turn a brilliant scarlet red, kind of a purplish red, maybe some copper color.
They are such a pretty plant.
In there, and so they are beautiful. And the clusters of bright red fruit, I suppose that's where that gets the cranberry nickname too. They're nice bright red. And the clusters of bright red berries look attractive also.
And you say that a lot of times that these can hold on into winter and that they have some real kind of nice winter interest.
Yeah. So if you don't use the berries in cooking, that gives you an appeal in the winter landscape. And of course, when we talk about winter landscapes, it's fun to include some of these things that have decorative. So picture a snowy winter day. You're looking out your window, you're looking out in your landscape, and you see the highbush cranberry, the American viburnum, it's also called. You look at that, and there against the white snow are hanging these clusters of red fruit. And maybe you see the birds pecking at them. So a nice autumn view, a nice winter view as well as autumn.
And one more from the large shrub variety to talk about, the dwarf sour cherry.
Yes, and they need a new marketing name. So who wants to, when you're looking at the different plants and you say the dwarf sour cherry, it doesn't really sound very appealing, so they need a new marketing name. But there are different cherries like that, bush-type cherries that are edible and make nice landscape shrubs as well.
Well, and also, where does the dwarf come from? You say that they get 6 to 10 feet high.
Yes, well, yeah, that's another thing. Dwarf is kind of a relative name. For example, one landscape shrub that comes to mind is the dwarf Korean lilac. Dwarf Korean lilac can get 8 to 10 feet tall. So I guess dwarf in relation to that can get maybe 15 feet tall. So yes, when any shrubs are listed as dwarf, we need to go one step beyond that and look at the actual height listed on the label.
Let's talk about some medium-sized shrubs, and here's one that I don't remember hearing about growing up, but I think over the last 10, 15 years, kind of the popularity and the name has gotten around a little bit more, and that's the Aronia black chokecherry.
Yes.
Is it the same as the Aronia berry?
It is. Okay. It's the Aronia. And also, I do not remember this growing up.
Okay.
I'm sure, plants aren't just magically created out of a test tube. Aronia was around, but some of these things are kind of brought forth out of the native, out of the wild, and rediscovered. And Aronia is one of them. Now, it's interesting. I heard you mention black chokecherry. Okay, it's interesting. And the name is actually black chokeberry.
Chokeberry, okay.
Yeah, no, but now that's a very common kind of overlooked thing.
Yeah.
Because chokeberry, chokecherry, so that's why I like the name Aronia.
Okay.
But you will see in many of the catalogs, you'll see it listed as black chokeberry. And so anyway, I'm glad you brought that up. So it's not chokecherry, but chokeberry. But also chokeberry, kind of, that's not a good marketing term either, but it's called that very many times. So Aronia, I like that name, kind of rolls off your tongue. So Aronia has really gained steam in the last decade, and it inspired me to plant one in our own landscape. And the Aronia berry, the Aronia shrub this year in our own landscape, it's about 6 years old. Is when I planted it. This year we got 2 ice cream buckets full of berries from it. Now, when they're fully ripe, I enjoy them fresh off, but they have a little bit of a dry tartness to them. And so, but they're wonderful for juices, jams, jellies, and Aronia berry muffins.
Oh, okay.
I need to bring you an Aronia berry muffin.
Sure.
Next week.
Yeah.
They are absolutely awesome. They can be used, Aronia berries can be used in anything you would use blueberries in, any cooking. They freeze well, the berries themselves freeze very well. And it's such a carefree shrub. You don't have to do anything. You get these good yields. And Aronia berry is higher in antioxidants, the good things we should all be eating more of, than blueberries, one of the highest fruits in antioxidants. And it's just such a winter hardy. And also, back to the double duty, Aronia shrubs turn a bright scarlet coppery color in the fall of the year. They are absolutely awesome.
No, there's an Aronia festival in the area, isn't there, too?
Yes.
I can't remember where.
And we're recording this on September 8th. The Aronia Berry Festival actually is tomorrow on the 9th.
Oh, okay.
So by the time this podcast airs, that festival will be done. But watch for that every year.
Yeah.
It's Aronia Berry Festival north of Fargo a ways. And, the Aronia shrub itself is a nice, neat shrub in growth habit, good, clean, green leaves all summer long, kind of a gloss. But also it's a shrub that maintains its height at probably around 4 to 4.5 feet high and about 3 feet wide, a very nice, almost tailored shrub. So that blends very nicely into a home landscape.
Let's talk about another one that's kind of gaining a lot of popularity, and that's the honeyberry.
Yes, that is another one. Never heard about that when I was growing up, but again, it wasn't just magically popped out of thin air. That was native to Russia and the high elevations of Japan. And it's related to the honeysuckle. It's the Lonicera genus of plants, so it's closely related to honeysuckle, which is rock-hard hardy for our area. So the honeyberry, also called haskap, a wonderful fruit that ripens in usually June, sometime in June, so it's an earlier ripening fruit. It's kind of an oblong little berry. Have you ever tasted them?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I've got a couple growing in our yard. They are not fruiting yet. You need 2 different cultivars of honeyberry, and garden centers sell more than one cultivar, so you've got the cross-pollination. So make sure that you get a couple. So what is a honeyberry, also known as haskap? What do those taste like? They're kind of a cross between a blueberry and a raspberry, and maybe toss in a blackberry. And so it has a unique taste its own. But again, depending on the cultivar, they can become anywhere from maybe 3 feet high up to 6 feet. So there's a height and a width available for almost any landscape. So honeyberry.
The fruit itself, you said it's oblong, but I'm wondering, because you're talking about that it's a mixture, it tastes like a mixture of raspberries, blueberries, and blackberries. And raspberries and blackberries have a different surface than the blueberries is relatively smooth. The raspberry and the blackberry are kind of noduled. They have a rougher surface. What does the honeyberry fruit look like?
Yeah, the honeyberry is kind of a darkish blue. They vary a little bit in color by cultivar, but kind of a darkish blue And also, they're a smooth berry.
Okay.
Yep, they aren't knobby like a raspberry, but a smooth fruit. And so do an online search for honeyberry. They've got kind of a unique looking fruit.
Here's another one I've never heard of, or here's one I have not heard of, but the Nanking cherry.
Yeah, Nanking cherry has been around quite a while, and I remember my folks had that in our backyard. That's a good cherry, and very useful for cherry pies and anything that you would cook out of.
I think I've got one of these, but let's talk about this. The sand cherry. I picked up one from a local retailer, and I picked it up more so for the leaves and exactly for that, for its visuals. We've had it for, I think this is the second year. I wonder if I haven't seen any fruit, and I wonder if this is one that was just bred mostly as a shrub.
Yeah, there are some that are more of an ornamental shrub than a fruiting
okay.
shrub. And of course, this whole group, some of these that we're talking about, such as the sand cherries and of course the plums and things, are in the genus called Prunus. And some of those are more ornamental than they are fruiting. And so there are some ornamental sand cherries. You also bring up the good point about that, the ornamental value. All of these that we're talking about, the fruit originates from a flower. So when these are flowering in May, that gives another element of beauty to a landscape.
Nice. Yeah, ours doesn't flower, so I think ours is probably just
yeah. And of course, we've talked about how gardening brings about patience in us, and so I'm sure it'll probably blossom just beautifully. It probably takes a little more time.
Well, speaking of time, we're going to take a little break, and when we come back, more about edible landscapes.
When you can't make it to City Hall or school board meetings, local journalists from Inforum.com will be there to report the facts and get your questions answered. Local news works for you. Stay up to date at Inforum.com.
All right, we're talking edible landscapes, things that you can plant in your yard that'll, as you say, do double duty, that'll produce fruits or vegetables, but also serve as aesthetically pleasing, something that's nice to look at. One of the ones, let's talk about blackcurrant and red currant.
Yeah, both of those have been around for a long, long time, and they make nice landscape shrubs. They're nice, good, clean foliage, and also then they produce the edible fruit. And currant jelly is really, really good. And so they don't become real large shrubs, so they can easily work into the home landscape, the foundation planting.
And there is a Moorhead Park named after this one. It starts with a G, and it's a berry. You pronounce it because I've always heard it. I've been told I've been mispronouncing it for all of my life.
Oh, gooseberry.
I always thought it was gooseberry. Have you ever heard gooseberry?
Okay, now I say gooseberry.
I think you're probably right.
Well,
I'm
not so sure, John. And gooseberry.
Just about every other person outside of my family that I've talked to says gooseberry.
Well, tomato. I'm not sure you're really inaccurate on that. Oh, but interesting. Yeah, roof or roof. Yes. I'm not going to say you're wrong on that. But it's interesting. Gooseberries are a greenish, maybe turning to kind of a greenish purple when they're ripe. And so gooseberries are they're kind of dime-sized fruit, and they're another one that's very nice in pies or jams. They're also quite nice just to eat fresh off of the vine, off of the shrub itself.
And you said that they were developed in North Dakota.
Yes, the Pixwell gooseberry. I believe that was one of the original horticulturists. Might have been A.F. Yeager, who also introduced the buttercup squash. I think Pixwell gooseberry was one of his introductions. I would have to 100% check on that. But yeah, that one's been around since probably the 1920s or 30s, Pixwell gooseberry, and that remains one of the nicer cultivars of gooseberry.
Let's kind of jump into some trees. Let's talk about some fruit-bearing trees. What are some that you'd like to talk about?
And of course, apples. If we want a small-scale tree, maybe even a screening tree.
And we're in prime apple season.
Oh yeah. and fun to harvest your own apples off your tree. And of course, apple trees tend to be fairly low-headed. The canopy is fairly low. So they can be used as a screening tree in your backyard.
Yeah.
Help screen, give a little privacy, plus all the wonderful fruit. And plums also. Oh, boy, the plum varieties that you see offered at locally owned garden centers, the plums off those trees rival or are better than the ones at the grocery store. I think they're better, juicier, sweeter. So plums are vastly underused in our area.
Speaking of plums, I know on Concordia's campus, where I live by Concordia's campus, love going through walks there, they have non-flowering plums. Beautiful
Yes.
tree. Are the plums trees, do they also change as colors and get that kind of deep, plummy color of the leaves as well?
In the fall of the year.
Okay. No,
they
they're beautiful.
do. They are beautiful. And a plum tree blossoming in spring is
Yes.
very beautiful too and fragrant.
I've noticed they drop their leaves early.
Yeah, they do. They tend to drop their leaves early.
Okay.
And so do consider plum trees, fresh plums. And again, the North Dakota and Minnesota hardy plums, they are juicy and sweet. In fact, they kind of spoil you because I kind of don't like store-bought plums anymore because you get your taste accustomed to the good stuff. Another tree that I should mention that's relatively new, or at least new to the nursery trade, is the Trader mulberry, Trader, Trader mulberry. Now, interesting history. When we were at a tour out at our house, I showed you that Trader mulberry. Now, mulberry, if you bought mulberry plants from other parts of the country, brought them here, they're not going to do well at all. But on a farmstead in Valley City, a 100-year-old mulberry tree was discovered, still growing 100 years later, bearing wonderful mulberries, and it was brought to the Valley City by German immigrants in the late 1800s, 1880s maybe even, and it survived all that time, well over 100 years. So anyway, a wonderful horticulturist by the name of Jim Wolof found a way to propagate that, and now it's in the nursery trade. I've got one. It can, if you did no pruning, get up to 35 feet tall.
Oh, so it's
but
quite
the berries on that are absolutely wonderful. They don't make it into our kitchen. When I'm doing yard work and I'm walking past the mulberry, I keep it pruned at about 12 feet tall. I don't want to get 35 feet because how would I pick the berries? So I keep it at 10 to 12 feet so I can easily reach. And when I'm doing yard work, when it's bearing, I nibble.
Yeah.
And so watch for the Trader mulberry in the garden center trade because it is becoming more popular.
All right. Let's talk about vines. What are some vines that
grapevines. Imagine an arbor in your yard, backyard, side yard, an arbor with your very own grapes growing over it. Now, there are a couple of types that I've got that are very good table-type grapes developed in Minnesota. One is Swenson Red, another is Edelweiss, and they do need winter protection, but that's okay. Give them a little winter protection. They're very good fresh-eating grapes. And there are other juice-type grapes. They're probably more winter hardy. But just imagine that your own arbor with grapes growing up, and then as they ripen, hanging on that, very decorative as well as useful.
I know some people also grow hop vines.
Yes, that's on one of the things on my bucket list. I've never grown hops. I got to grow hops.
Okay.
See what a long list I have yet to go.
Well, that's good. That's good.
That is good.
See, like you said, we're already getting excited for the potential for next year and the year after.
Exactly.
Things on the list there. Let's talk about some other things that maybe people could fit inside their yard. If you don't have a big enough yard to plant a tree or a large shrub, let's talk about some of the smaller things that maybe you can even work into your vegetable garden.
Right. And for example, a perennial flower garden, or if you have a landscape that has perennial flowers in it, what about planting some strawberries in that? Sometimes we'll do ground covers. Well, strawberries kind of act like a ground cover. And so what about in a person's landscape or perennial flower garden, or the edge of your vegetable garden, certainly, planting strawberries.
Do strawberries require a lot of root space, or because I've
No.
heard of some people planting them in window boxes, but also even in rain gutters, extra rain gutters,
Exactly.
using them as planters.
They don't require much root space. You could grow them in a pot. The problem is overwintering, because if you overwintered them in a pot, the cold is so severe coming in from the sides of that pot that they would probably freeze out. But since they don't require much root space and don't become overly invasive, what about planting them in the perennial garden in a little spot, or tucking them in amongst shrubs? They need sunshine, but in amongst shrubs in the foundation landscape. That'd be kind of neat. Also, raspberries can be kind of tucked in, and oftentimes in our landscapes or perennial flower garden, you've maybe got a little spot that you could put some of these. You can get some pretty good production off of a couple of strawberry or raspberry plants.
Now, I noticed that there is a raspberry bush near us on Concordia's campus that produces usually in early to mid-July, let's say. And the patch is filled up over the years, and now there's part of that newer patch is producing fruit now. Do raspberries produce that for that long, or do you think that this is like a second batch? What's going on there, do you think?
Yes, as far as producing later in the season. Yeah, there are some varieties called everbearing that produce both the summer crop and then a late fall crop. And so that's good. I should caution a little bit, though, when I say add raspberries into your home landscape, because one of the good points is that they do produce suckers, which gives you the new plants. And so a person would need to be cautious in the home landscape that the raspberries will produce suckers. And another thing that I should mention that is fun to include in a perennial garden, rhubarb.
Yeah.
I may have mentioned in a previous podcast, once we had taken our kids down to Valley Fair. And, of course, a beautiful landscape, beautiful flower beds, and all of a sudden my head turned twice. I thought, is that what I'm seeing? Is that what I think it is? And it was rhubarb. They had a mass planting of rhubarb. And the leaves, they have that kind of big tropical look. The leaves were very healthy. And, gosh, yeah, I thought, a novel look. And so in a person's perennial garden, with other things, I'm going to plant a rhubarb plant in ours. I was on a tour of yards a few years ago, a beautiful perennial flower garden. And all of a sudden I thought, is that ferny-looking plant what I think it is? And it was. Asparagus.
Oh, yeah.
Asparagus, after you harvest and after 4th of July, you let the tops go up, and it's this beautiful poof of ferny, bright, fresh green. And that meshed beautifully in a perennial flower garden.
Oh, it'd be nice. And if you like rhubarb, another one to consider would be Swiss chard, which is even more colorful.
Yes, yeah, planting Swiss chard in there, the rainbow chard. The stalks of that are beautiful. And kale, there's some very decorative kale. And so kind of fun to harvest some things out of your landscape.
It is, and there's a lot you can include. There's a lot you can do that you can get a lot of benefit from it, like we're saying, both in eating, both as just being able to look at it and enjoy.
And so it's fun. When we talk about the concept of our pioneer ancestors and homesteaders planting these things, out on the prairie to surround either their sod house or their early homestead, some of these things, those were survival. But it's kind of fun. Now we can have them as food to eat, but also enjoy some of the decorative aspects as well.
So, Don, if people have questions about plants or anything else relating to horticulture in our region, what's the best way to reach you?
I love emails. That's the best way. And I love both questions, as well as people also share with me their successes. It's fun to see the different things that people are growing. So an email address, donald.kinzler, KINZLER, @ndsu.edu.
All right, well, that's going to do it for another episode of Growing Together, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, have a great week, everyone, and thanks for listening.